and this blew my mind because I never really thought about it. But the generation that's in school right now is the first generation ever that is less cognitively capable than their parents in every single metric of executive functioning.
Hmm.
And I think part of the reason, well, in the Congress hearing, they were a lot of it was blaming like apps and social media and things like this. But it does go deeper. It goes into a structural design problem, where we talked earlier about foundation. And kids aren't really developing the foundational skills they need. So spelling, despite how simple it seems, it's really about phonetic awareness and like working memory, right? And when you learn how to spell, that's actually tied into reading. This is a really interesting example because
Welcome to episode 90 of Tokyo Alumni Podcast. Today, our guest is Timothy Cook. Welcome to the podcast, Timothy.
I teach elementary school in Amman, Jordan. And I also run an open source AI initiative called Connected Classroom, and I do a lot of publishing and writing through Psychology Today and other outlets as well.
Awesome. Well, you write a lot about AI, and other people actually had introduced me to your writing through LinkedIn, and that's how I got to follow you on LinkedIn. You're producing a lot of really cool stuff. And this is one of the kind of more unusual episodes where you are not an international school graduate, but you are on the international school zeitgeist, right? Your kid goes to international school, your wife works at international school. So really, yeah, welcome to the podcast. And I'm just going to jump right into it. AI, right? And you write a lot about AI. I write a lot about AI. I thought a good way to jump into it would be a major conversation right now in education in general or in the world is AI dependency. And in your writing, you mentioned how students are delegating higher order cognitive skills to AI systems. What do you feel like, especially as you in elementary school, me in high school, how do we sort of delineate at what age groups they should be using how much AI and for what?
Yeah, great question. So this is this is not my opinion. This is based in actual research. There's multiple studies now that have corroborated this phenomenon. Um, so there is a difference in age and the type of dependency, like the type of effect that AI has on dependency when you offload to it. So I want you to think of like as an adult, right? If you use AI to, let's just say, format a lesson plan or a paper you're writing, or even help you design a PowerPoint or something like this with your information or content, the thing that you're offloading is just the laborious part of the design, right? Because you already know how to structure, right?
Yeah.
So take a younger child, for example, like 8 or 9, and if they were using AI to do something like help them read or to synthesize a passage in a book, which I'm sure is not really often the case. I don't know how many teachers use it, but I'm just using this as an example. These are foundational skills, right? So the foundational skills in elementary school are fluency, phonetic awareness, right? Learning how to read, deep read, and summarize things, or even synthesize across text. But in order to do that, you have to have foundation. And it would be similar to middle school or high school. The foundation that students need to understand what to do is structural, right? A lot of things in high school and middle school are structural. And before you even think about offloading to AI, you have to have the foundation of the cognitive work
Mm,
because there's a difference between atrophy and foreclosure,
mm,
right? So if I atrophy a muscle, like I just, I'm a biker and I stop biking, my legs get weaker, but I can rebuild the muscle.
mm.
But if I've never learned how to ride a bike, that's foreclosure, right? Then I've never developed the skill. So if I ever need to pedal, I don't have the ability to do so. So
Yeah.
there's a difference here.
That's really interesting. The words you use there, atrophy versus foreclosure. And I think what we're talking about here connects to a conversation I recently had with a learning coach about spell check. One thing I noticed as a high school teacher is like in the often in curriculum and in assessment, spelling is assessed, right? In elementary school, middle school. But one thing I've noticed as someone who teaches ninth grade, we usually get rid of it in high school. And that's been a trend, I would say, maybe in the last decade or two. And I think it's become a little bit complicated with now spell check. So, for example, with the tests that I give on exam.net, I have tried with spell check and without spell check. And my findings have been kind of mixed. On one hand, I think with my like 10th graders, spell check is, it's just like a little assistance, right? But sometimes I have some ninth graders that are spelling so poorly. I'm worried that this crutch is no longer really a crutch, right? It's like being in a wheelchair. They're just not like they're totally just typing in words that sound like maybe what they're trying to say. So I guess what I'm trying to get back to you with elementary and middle school is as we kind of there's always been conversations about one computer, right, one student, and I think the age keeps getting younger. What does that
Mhm.
conversation look like in the elementary side for how much students rely on laptops?
Well, I mean, look at the tools. So this is relevant. It was just there was a in Congress, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and this blew my mind because I never really thought about it. But the generation that's in school right now is the first generation ever that is less cognitively capable than their parents in every single metric of executive functioning.
Hmm.
And I think part of the reason, well, in the Congress hearing, they were a lot of it was blaming like apps and social media and things like this. But it does go deeper. It goes into a structural design problem, where we talked earlier about foundation. And kids aren't really developing the foundational skills they need. So spelling, despite how simple it seems, it's really about phonetic awareness and like working memory, right? And when you learn how to spell, that's actually tied into reading. This is a really interesting example because what just happened 2 weeks ago in third grade was we have noticed that kids really struggle to decode.
Hmm.
But we have progressively, because it's been considered to be progressive, to move away from things like spelling tests or math fluency, timed tests, and things that we grew up in, right? It's been like, oh, that's not very progressive anymore. But we're noticing that, well, kids can't spell and it affects the way they write and it affects the way they read. So these things are all linked because they're foundational skills. And if you wanted to apply this back to AI, right? Because our school tries to block X, Y, and Z. But even if you use Google, AI is already embedded into it. It gives you that nice little summary, right? So just that's the same as spell check, right? If I type a word in or even use voice to text, I say interesting into my iPad and it writes it for me.
Yeah.
It's no different, right? So if you play this out 5 years from now, even students that are using Google and they don't understand that this is an AI's predictive synthesis of tons of source material, they'll start believing that this is the answer. Like this is the only way to retrieve information. That's dangerous.
Yeah, that's really interesting how you said it's already embedded into the systems, right? It's structural. And I mean, kind of connecting that back to schools. And this maybe kind of connects to, I kind of have four big points I want to touch upon today. And this connects to the future of education, which I know is kind of a broad topic. But
Yeah.
when we look at sort of the structures of schools, 2030, 2035. What
Yeah.
what does that look like in regards to how much reliance schools have in regards to AI applications? And I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day with research, for example. There's a lot of competing parties right now, right? I mean, sure, there's Google Classroom, but in regards to kind of who the big AI player is, I mean, it's like the private market. I mean, sure, was it Anthropic is, and cloud have been doing very well, but you still have DeepSeek, you still have OpenAI. Like,
Mhm.
is there like a company that is trying to take over the educational market? Is that Gemini because it's, connected to Google? Like, what does that look like? Or are we just gonna have to build our own internally?
Well, this the structural, I mean, ed tech companies have been trying to get into education for 10, 15 years. And that's a lot of the reason we have these learning problems is because of technology. While it is helpful in a lot of cases, it can also be detrimental in a lot of cases. I am not someone that dislikes AI. And I know sometimes people read my writing and they're like, oh man, you really hate AI. I actually don't. I have no problem with artificial intelligence. I think the tool is exceptionally good at efficiency and extending one's capability into other areas, right? Like coding is a great example, or formatting or design. I use it for search engine optimization to help me with website design. Like all of these things, I would have had to spend hundreds of hours learning how to do, and I don't have to anymore, right? But I bring a certain kind of expertise into it. So I don't actually think, I think the conversation around AI and education is actually completely wrong. And I don't think we should be focusing on AI at all. I don't think it matters what tool there is. I don't think, because the technology advances so rapidly, we can't play catch up to what the current model can do. We just need to forget about it. It's actually a design issue, and AI has exposed what's flawed about the educational system. That's all it's done. So it seems like you wanna hop in there.
Well, you definitely like made a light bulb go off in my head where I think you're right that in many ways it challenges like bad teaching. So I'll just give you a quick example of what I've seen. When I taught AP psychology about 4 or 5 years ago, it's kind of mind blowing that this was actually an assignment back then. This was a common assignment used by many AP psych teachers. It was watch a movie that's related to some sort of psychological problem, like Beautiful Mind, etc. And you'd essentially write a paragraph or two about the movie, a paragraph two about what type of psychological disorder, and then like a paragraph of your opinion. It would have probably taken 4 hours, right, back in the day.
Sure.
You could finish it in about 2 minutes now, and there would be no way for a teacher to know that you used AI. So my feedback to that though, and it actually got a little pushback because it was in some AP Psych group. I said it exposes a bad assignment, right? Why was this
It's
assignment there in the
terrible
first place?
assignment.
Yeah. And like in some ways, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, so I'm going to give you back the mic here, but yeah, I like your framing of maybe it challenges what can be done by computers and what can't. But then I guess my question to
Well,
you would be what should we focus on then?
take what you just that example that you just give, right? And it is structural too, because a lot of high school or in middle school preparing for high school is about the structure of producing acceptable outputs on a schedule, right? This is what you must produce to show your capability by this time, right? And or if you do standardized testing, it's here's some answers, choose the one that's correct, right? Like this has been embedded into the educational system for decades, and there hasn't really been a change or a move away from it. Now, obviously, there's teachers that are really good, and there's some schools that try different things, but most of the system, right, collectively, at least speaking in the United States, is still about funneling people to university. And it's still based on this standardized idea that if you produce capable output, you must be capable, right? Like, and for most of the last couple of decades, that's made a lot of sense. Like, it's worked, right? If I write a good essay, I'm a good writer.
Mm,
Now it's not the case because you can write a structurally sound essay, right? Like what you just said, 2-2-1, right? With AI in 2 to 4 minutes, and it will be an acceptable output,
mm,
but you didn't actually do any of the work. So is it your fault as the kid? Is it AI's fault, or is it the design problem? Is it the design problem for education? So we have to think about, well, what kind of skills are future employers going to be looking for? Are they going to be looking for homogenized students that all collectively think the same because they've grown up analyzing statistical AI output, right? So collectively all thinking the same few points. Or are they going to want creative thinkers? Are they going to want people that can analytically assess or adapt to different problems? Are they going to want people that can lead or make decisions through artificial intelligence, not with it as a partner, quote unquote, but actually be in charge or the person that's uh, kind of overseeing and controlling the decision loop? I forget the statistics all off the top of my head now, but I did a presentation on the World Economics Forum's 2025 jobs report, which looked at what companies are going to look for in 2030. And the top ones were leadership and influence, analytical and creative thinking.
Mm.
And AI was down at 11. And here's the crazy thing is only 20% of companies thought that traditional reading, writing, and math were going to be important. So people want thinkers, like
Mm.
thinkers, and you can look up this. It's called the World Economic Forum's Future Jobs Report, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's got some really interesting data on what employers are looking for.
So in that case, like if we're preparing students for that world, and I'd be interested to hear what your take on this would be I think more than ever. So in IB, the English department, they have IOs, right? Whereas social
Yeah.
studies, you have IAs. I think everything should start leaning IOs. Like, how can you express what you think verbally? Because again, in writing, organizing that writing, polishing it up, that's so much easier. And again, I have not seen any cataclysmic changes, at least in the DP or the AP so far, other than maybe they're going to start testing more on screens. But I guess that doesn't really have much to do with AI. That's more about
It's
text.
just, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, let's make sure students aren't cheating, or let's make sure we can monitor them or surveil them so they're not. That's still not solving the problem. Like the design needs to change. I'll give you an analogy. I'll give you an example that I've been thinking about. And I'll try to keep it short because I told my wife and she was like, Tim, that is way too long of an analogy. But
Yeah. Mm.
but suppose I go to a baking class, right? And the instructor, we learn, we learn about different recipes. We watch videos on mixing, right? We're not actually doing, we she gives us some lectures and she's like, okay, well, yeah, you have to use, a cup of flour to a cup of milk, and I learn about all these things. And then at the end of the course, she says, listen, tomorrow your task is to bring, or at the end of the week, your task is to bring in a delicious chocolate chip cookie. And that's what your grade's going to be on. It's going to be on this cookie. I don't care how you get there. You have to come in, give me this cookie, we'll test it. And if it's delicious, you'll get an A, right? I go home and I'm like, okay, well, I actually haven't tried baking yet, but I just know the theory behind it. And I know that if I just bring in a good cookie, I'm going to get an A. So instead, I ask my wife, who knows how to bake cookies. I'm like, hey, can you just bake up one of these cookies for me? I'll bring it into class and I'll get an A and we'll call it a day. Right. So she does it. I bring it in. They're like, oh, wow, this is really good. Great job, Tim. Right. You produced this fantastic chocolate chip cookie and you can get your A and be on your way. Right. But the point of me doing that cookie class wasn't actually to produce the cookie, right? It was to learn how to bake. And in order to learn how to bake, I have to learn how to measure the ingredients. I have to see how to put them together. I have to make tons of mistakes. I mean, I actually have tried making cookies many times, and I have never really produced something that was that good. I
Mm.
might burn the cookie. I might overcook it the first time. I might undercook it.
Mm.
The process of struggle and friction in learning how to bake is what would make me 3 years from now be able to bake a batch of cookies for my daughter's birthday and all her friends,
Mm.
right? If I outsourced the work of learning how to make the cookie, then I'll never have that skill. And I think that's what education needs to be now. It
Mm.
needs to be experimental.
Yeah.
We need to really push friction and struggle onto kids. but also to make it authentic and connected to real world context. I
Mm,
recently came across this learning theory. It's called situated learning. The idea is that expertise is developed from the periphery, from the outside in,
mm,
as you basically you cannot separate context and activities from the learning experience. Kind of integrating more of an authentic way of teaching and learning
mm,
would it doesn't and then you know what? If I want to use AI to look up a cookie recipe, who
mm,
cares?
mm.
Right? Like why would it matter if I use AI along the way to help me learn something
Yeah.
about the cookie? Right? To help me remember or understand something about baking.
Mm,
The thing is I still have to learn and show that I can bake.
mm,
And if the teacher didn't assess the cookie, but instead assessed the process and my reflection on baking,
mm.
that would be a more meaningful experience, I think.
No, I think that's actually a fantastic metaphor. Are you familiar with like the best fit, like standards-based grading? Because it sounds,
Yes,
yeah, because it sounds like, I
somewhat.
mean, that's kind of touching upon what you're saying, right? Like assessing the process, not just the final product. And I think you've mentioned it in one of your pieces where you said just in general the whole transcript, right, is an issue because you're just looking at the final product, or in this case, the cookie. So in that case, though, again, for the best fit, at least this is how I interpret it and utilize it, is that if a student is demonstrating like improved mastery, I would not average it and I would give them where they end, but presuming that I could see that. And at least in my classroom, that would look like, like small quizzes, quick checks, et cetera, et cetera. Would in the elementary school context, like, do you guys also kind of struggle with having a system that appropriately measures process versus just like a final product?
I think it's difficult to measure process when you're ultimately assessing on standard RL 3.9, right?
Mm,
So while you teach the process, ultimately a lot of the final grade per se still comes from that last summative assessment or the body of work that the students produced during that time.
mm,
Oftentimes, this assessment is provided for you from the curriculum, as is in the case with a lot of elementary school. If you get the Lucy Calkins reading workshop, there's a assessment to go with that, right? And
mm,
that's the easiest way to standardize and make sure that all the elementary teachers in the school are following the same curriculum and giving the same assessments. There's not a lot of variety that you can do outside of that. That's the metric of data that the school wants to keep things consistent. So while you might teach something, right, ultimately you're going to be grading still on the standard. So I do think that that can be somewhat limiting in
yeah.
elementary school. All students should be assessed on their own growth, not
Mm.
against others, but against themselves.
No, that's a great point. And I think
But that's obviously
ultimately,
difficult to do.
yeah, that's true. And it's kind of what pre-podcast we had a brief conversation about how and you've I think mentioned it, you're not explicitly against AI. And for the record, I am also not like super pro AI. Like, people often see my writing and they think I'm like super pro AI. I'm not. But I think the most important thing is kind of what we're doing right now and what I sometimes do with my learning coaches is actually having that conversation. Right? Whereas I think in a lot of schools right now, it's just kind of become we're not going to use it for this, or you will use it for this. And like, that's it, right? There's no kind of like, okay, how is this impacting, their learning, different age levels. And I think that kind of actually connects well to sort of the next topic, which is reskilling educators. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in your chalk beat piece, you argue that we must not outsource the foundational work of teaching. How do we train educators to use AI without surrendering instructional judgment? So I know that's a really big topic there, but I'm just going to throw it at you and see where
So
you want to take it.
To answer both these questions, you can't disattach the financial incentives of the companies and the consultants that are going into schools and promoting this stuff. The easiest thing you can do, and I'm sure many people in the international community have already had schools hire someone for $30,000 or whatever to come in and teach them how to use AI models in their own teaching. And this is missing the point of reskilling because I, as a teacher, don't need to learn how to use a large language model as a quote unquote thought partner, but it is easy to get paid to do and it's tangible. So the school can be like, yes, we took care of this, right? Our teachers know they can use AI to enhance their lessons, et cetera, right? But the problem with AI output, and you've probably experienced this, and so has everyone else that's used it, is it lacks genuine context from your practice, right? Teacher training should move towards becoming experts in human development and cognition,
Mm,
right? We need to understand the cognitive side effects of AI, the diagnostic, in order to help students with the cure. And it does start with the teachers. Like
yeah.
teachers don't need to learn how to use Gemini better. They
Mm,
need to learn about how it affects thinking in themselves and students that haven't developed thinking in the first place. They have to model correct usage, right? You as the adult have to model it just like you would model how to share,
mm,
right? With your first grade students. You have to model responsible artificial intelligence usage. This is, I think, what would be the cure
yeah.
for school really deploying a good ethical AI model
That's a really
framework.
interesting point there about, yeah, like how much instructional judgment. You're saying essentially just keeping that human component, keeping critical thinking alive, right? In a lot of ways is the teacher's role. When you mention like human-centered learning design, what would you say is the first competency teachers must build in an AI era?
Adaptive intelligence,
And what
meaning
does that look
that
like?
what it means is that you should have the cognitive ability to adapt to a situation in which a tool may not be available.
Mm,
I think that's the foundational skill that everyone needs is adaptive problem solving, right? Is how do you solve a problem, right, in a novel situation by using what you've previously learned to
mm,
transfer or apply to this new problem.
mm,
And if you've developed that skill, then you can also use AI in that process later on, and it might help you solve the problem faster. But the actual work of being able to do that needs to be taught. The second, or I guess the next two in that foundation would be being able to creatively or uniquely synthesize things.
mm,
Okay. And also being intrinsically motivated to learn. I can say this is why I really do like AI because I have a lot of intrinsic motivation to learn. This tool is a fantastic tool if you want to retrieve information. It's much better than Google search, right? You can learn a lot. So those are the three foundational skills that I think kind of set up. And there's other, I would say moral and ethical judgment is really important. And I would say creative expression and genuine collaboration is really important.
So as we wrap up this podcast, I kind of want to shift our angle to like, so what can schools do, right? So far we've talked about what are, struggles and what are issues. And I wanted to ask you a question about, so what does assessment, right, in 2030, 2035, in order to, avoid sort of the pitfalls of AI and also encourage skills that, as you mentioned earlier in the, the World Economic Forum, these companies want are in fact trained. So what does that look like in regards to sort of K through 12?
I have a ton of case studies for this just in elementary school in what you can already do to kind of either redesign assessment or at least offer opportunities for enhancement or different modalities of communicating. one of the things that I've started doing this year, and I experimented with last year, is podcasting with kids or video interviews. Um, and it's because I've noticed like what we're doing right now. You talk about writing, right? You say like, "Oh, I've read all this stuff that you've written, Tim," right? Well, the wild thing about AI is I could be completely full of shit. Like you don't know, right? It's all on the internet. You have no idea if I actually know what I'm talking about or if I just use AI to help me write it. And by engaging in these conversations, this is where you can understand like expertise or elicit expertise through genuine communication,
Mhm.
right? So having students, I think, in a format where they write first and then they have to extend that through collaborative communicating with each other, and they love it. I mean, everyone loves making their own podcast, right? Because oh, we're content creators, but you have to develop a certain kind of expertise to have a conversation that's unscripted.
Mhm.
And one of the things that students tend to do at the beginning before they learn is they write down what their lines are going to be. And then I had two girls do this and they came like, "Oh, we keep messing up. We keep messing up." And I said, "You keep messing up because you're trying to copy the lines that you wrote." I said, "Do you understand the topic that you're talking about?" They're like, "Yeah," because they had 4 pages. I said, "Just have a conversation about it then, right? One of you facilitates, you both just have a conversation." I think this is a really interesting way to at least enhance the assessment process by having kids back up what they know and to show that it's registered or it's been integrated into their thinking. If I can describe to you how I baked a cookie and you could describe to me how you would change that or what kind of cookie you would make, we are talking about expertise. We're talking about authenticity. We're talking about an activity that we really did, right? We've created something tangible and related to the real world. That's one thing that all classes, I don't think it matters what class, should really consider implementing is at least conversation, but recorded conversation. I don't
Yeah.
know. What do you think?
Yeah, you've touched upon the 2 points I love about I think it connects into MUN, right? I'm a
Mhm.
big MUN person, big fan of it, is two things with MUN, and I think they reflect pretty much with what you just said, is you have to be able to speak what you believe in. And for example, a rule I have is you can't have note cards. Otherwise, kids will just have pre-written, most likely AI made or AI helped. But if you're just there, and I tell them, and it connects back to what you said, right? It's not being anti-AI. So you can use AI to start it. But then if you practice it and you're not just memorizing line by line, and this is where I think the MUN part becomes interesting. There's something called POIs. Someone can raise their hand, ask a question, say, you just mentioned, that Germany should not get back Rhineland. But, isn't there a historical context here? And then they have to, it's like, is it here, right? They
Yeah.
can't just Google it. And the same thing goes with collaboration. This is what I love about MUN is it mimics the real world, right? Like when you and I work, we don't just get a test at the end of the month and, however your score is your salary, right? It's really more about how I'm interacting with with my peers, my bosses, and not just like professionally, right? Just in general. And you see that in an MUN conference, right? Which students are communicating with each other politely, courteously, who's kind of even asking a question. There's a big difference with tonality, right? A student who's very
Mhm.
aggressive about like, hey, versus like, hey, can you tell me more about blah, blah, blah. So I do really think that is going to be a pivotal difference, I think, between those who can demonstrate understanding through sort of that non traditional way, which is essentially with a
Mhm.
paper pen, just you or just your computer. This benefits I've had even from this conversation alone is like how so many schools, and I'm not sure if you see this at your school, I feel like you have 10-20% of people who are perceived as pro AI, 10-20% who are perceived as anti AI, and then you kind of have people that drift off in both sides. But like the reality is, that's not the case, right? As you've indicated, many times that you use AI in many ways, but you're also aware of the dangers and vice versa for me. I've written actually a lot of articles that could be perceived as pro AI, but when I just talk to people about it, I all the time mention about the dangers as well as even specific companies, which we spoke a little bit off air, right? There's certain companies that are far less ethical than others.
Mhm.
So I think just kind of getting out of this dichotomy, I think is also a big part for all schools, right? Like not going, oh, that guy is pro AI, anti AI, but just figuring out as a full school our goal, which is essentially teaching and learning.
Yeah, and every time I do a workshop, the first thing I always say is let's stop framing everything about AI. Because when you think about what's good, this came up at the beginning of the podcast. What's good teaching and what's good learning?
Mm,
It, we don't need to make sure that the 20% of people that never want to use AI use AI. And we
mm,
don't want to say the 20% of people that love AI can't figure out a way to integrate it into the classroom.
mm,
But the examples that we just talked about, integrated learning, podcasts, looking at mastery over final output, this is just good teaching design, irrelevant of AI, right? So the structure that we need to build in schools has to support solid cognitive development. And if we want to use AI or not use it, it shouldn't affect the outcome of that development.
mm,
And that's where I think this conversation always goes askew is everyone's like, well, how do I use AI in my class? It's if your class is designed well, it doesn't matter
mm,
if you use it or you don't.
mm,
But to try and comply students
mm,
through either these platforms where the screen is locked or you ban a tool or you do this, that's not actually helping students learn the right way to use these tools.
mm,
It's not giving them exposure, and it's certainly not putting an adult in a position to model the correct behavior. So
mm,
I actually think these types of things, these like reactions to AI that schools often deploy will
mm,
have negative consequences for students. I
mm,
think creating a positive learning experience, right? People are excited, kids are excited, they want to learn, like they're intrinsically motivated to learn. I have a really interesting case study that I did with my third graders where we have some issues with math fluency when it comes to multiplication and division. Um, and students came to me with the idea, they're like, I want to build a math game to practice multiplication. And I thought, well, what a cool question. Never in the history of school have we ever had the capability to be able to build a math game from scratch, like digitally, that you could play. But with Claude code, you actually can. So I thought, well, how do you do this to make sure that Claude's not just writing the math game for the students to play without student input?
mm,
And what I came up with was almost like a podcast. I said, you and your friends, you go plan what game you'd want. You have to have a conversation, right? About the game, the constraints, the design, what you want the outcome to be, what kind of math you're doing. You're going to have a chat. And when you're done with that chat, send me the recording. I'll transcribe it into AI and I will use that. And then this is the important part is I ask the AI, can you ask the students follow-up questions based on their conversation? Once the students answer those questions, then I have Claude create the game. Then
mm.
they test it. It takes about a day or two for each one, right? And I've kind of lost stamina for it. I think we created there's a LinkedIn post about it. We
Yeah.
created about 5 or 6 games, and they're really fun, but they're all student created. It's
Wow.
like they programmed their own games. The only thing they didn't do is write the actual code.
Wow.
And this is the types of things you can do with AI now. You can teach students that they are agents
Yeah.
of design that they control, right? The way that the AI outputs things. But it's different than saying, hey, I want you to create a math game for third grade that uses multiplication.
Yeah, because then it's done, right, with that.
Well,
And
yeah, but
no
you'll get a
process.
generic math game.
Yeah.
If you have a conversation and you have three kids chatting about what they picture and what they want it to look like and what they want the parameters to be, um, you get these weird games that are clearly built by third grade,
That is so
right?
cool. Can I ask you, when they do that though, are they doing that audio? So would there be an audio that you're recording that you give
Yeah,
to
so
the AI?
they just bring their iPad out in the hallway. They have a conversation about it. Right, I can give you like an example. One of the games, uh, we were like, oh, we want someone falling in a parachute,
Yeah.
right? Every 10 seconds they have to answer a math question, and if they get it wrong, then lightning comes down and they have to dodge it, or I
Yeah.
don't know. It was just a wild game, right? But the kids thought it was so fun. And you know what? The crazy thing is, this actually did increase their multiplication fluency. Playing these games did have a tangible benefit. And I believe it's because they were student led and they were actually excited to engage in the product that they created, right? It's a lot different than putting them on an iPad platform that's like, hey, I just want you to practice multiplication.
Yeah.
This is, I want you to practice multiplication with the game that you just built
Yeah.
for yourself.
It's so cool, right? Like what
Yeah.
you it said too is so simple to execute, but it's so cool, like when it comes to like what it creates, the purpose, how proud students are of what they made. Wow, you're definitely making me wonder a bit more with my practice too. That, and it goes back to the conversation we had earlier. Sometimes I feel like it is like, Voldemort or something. I can't even bring up AI, right, with certain topics because I feel like I'm gonna be, an outcast. Like, why is he using AI for that? Like, and then on the other end, when I don't use AI, I'm thinking like maybe I could use AI. But what you've demonstrated in that one example is that you could get the best of both worlds. You can have them think, you can have them collaborate, but on the back end, you have these original games. I'll start today. I have it on my phone. I just got to expand on it. But yeah, we have limited time here. So, I mean, the last thing I want to say to you is thank you for coming on as a podcast guest. This is episode 90. So, not quite episode 100, but I feel like it's a landmark episode. We're at the 90s now. And it's just so interesting talking to someone else in this space. And as I was saying earlier, we're in flux, right? We're in a flux period. That's why I tell students as well. Like, I don't know how I'm going to be using it a year or two from now. What I do know is I want to engage in interesting conversations with educators, administrators, and students, right? To see like
Mhm.
where are we going to take this together, right, as a community. And I feel like talking to you today for I think in total is about an hour and a half has been
Yeah.
an incredible experience for me. And yeah, again, thank you so much.
Yeah, great. This was a lot of fun.